lot of women don't have a lot of men in their lives that they respect. And I asked myself, I was like, well, is it possible for women to respect men? Because if if respect is all about, from my perspective, if respect is all about embodying, admiring, it's like, do women want to embody the concepts of a man? You know, like women probably want to embody concepts of other women because that is they're kind of merging with reality from not in an antithetical way, right? They want like to go to like, right? So it's like maybe women don't want to respect men because they don't really want to be like men, right? They want to be like women. And maybe they just fall into kind of respecting women from that standpoint. And it's not to say that like women obviously don't uh not all women disrespect men, like I'm sure there's a bunch of women out there that do respect men and stuff. But maybe it's coming from like a maybe that's just like a subconscious kind of tickle in the back of people's minds. Um, and the next thing is that so I liked what you said, where you were kind of talking about the foundation of a lot of like, well, what's the theme behind the men that you respect? And you're kind of talking about this kind of giving of service, right? Like understanding this truth inside yourself and then trying to give back to a community. For me, as I was kind of drawing these themes through the different men I respect, I found that I respect that the theme that I respect is like picking up your suffering. Like experiencing challenge and not kind of buckling beneath that challenge, but like overcoming it and rising above it. And through the challenge and through the trauma, finding this kind of golden nugget that is your virtue, and then being able to kind of embody that virtue. So, but another thing that you were saying is like, I feel safe around the men that I respect. And this kind of came back to this thing of do like are goodness and respect exclusive? Can you be someone that is respectable and also be a good person? Because we're talking about just these few characters that we've discussed, where it's like Rudolf Steiner, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, all highly respectable men, but were they like good fathers, right? Were they good partners? Were they good community members? And it's possible, I don't know, we don't know that, right? We don't really necessarily know their lives, but some of the individuals that I wrote down that I respect, I kind of started asking myself, like, all right, sure, I respect them, but like, were they good people, And so it kind of ties into this thing of like safety and being comfortable and being safe because, you know, I could invite someone over for a dinner party that I respect, but at the same time, it's like, Jesus, you're an insufferable person to be around. Like, I respect you and you create and have such awesome ideas, but like, you're such a low dose human, Like, like, and maybe that's why, like Rudolf Steiner. I bet Rudolf Steiner was insufferable to be around, right? You try and invite that guy over for a dinner party, and it's like, oh my God, like chill out, it's not always about this, like, And I'm curious as to, what your thoughts are behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's just so much in that. Yeah, I feel like you just like opened up several universes and it's just like my mind's just like, ooh, so many fun things to kind of dance around with. Um, yeah, I think like the first kind of thought that comes into my head is like I would not want to meet any of these people necessarily that I admire, you know? Like I think it's like maybe heroes are for idolizing. That's not to say they're heroes, but that
Right.
there's a difference, as you're saying, in between like, all right, this is a person I wanted to like, I want to fall asleep listening to like Steiner or something like, but I don't want to wake up listening to Steiner. You know, like I don't want to be like it's like 12 o'clock and I gotta be like getting some work done and I put on Steiner. Like, no, there's a timeliness to it. You know, there's like, all right, I got this this is the part of my life that I will open the door to that. No, 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 you're not coming to dinner. Like, no, 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 we're not, you know. And I think there's a lot to that, you know, and that whole I mean, we can go down rabbit holes on what is good and all that kind of stuff, but I think that's a great point that I'm not holding these people in every instance. You know, I was just hearing a quote from the Dalai Lama with a very kind of un-Western thought process of like the quality of any action is to be based solely the merit of that action on the intention behind it, not on its success or failure in the world. You know, what was in the heart, in the mind, in the soul of that being performing that
Mhm.
action? That's where the merit does or does not lie. And
Mhm.
I can understand that. I can, that there's pieces that resonate, but at the same time, you know, if we take an artist, you know, any kind of famous artist, I don't think necessarily that I have to hate their work because I learn, oh, you know, they said something horrible one time or they really hurt somebody or they did. We all do loads of actions, you know. And
Yes.
I mean,
Mm.
I mean, if we just think of when we were children, right? I mean, I'm sure we can think of plenty of things that we've done that we were not proud of, you know? And you can say, all right, the levels of, this person killed someone and it was like, all right. I'm not saying we all, you know, are the same, but, you know, we know what we know about ourselves and what our minds are capable of. And it just in thought, I mean, you show me one person who says, in my mind, never has the idea of killing someone or like, you know, that's just like, you've never had a dream of violence. Like, come on, get out of here. What the hell are you talking
Never
about?
been stuck in
You,
traffic. Like,
you,
come
you
on.
know,
Like,
it's
you
a,
know.
I mean, and that brings up a whole other thing. Like, we're not in control of our minds to a large extent. There's stuff that's just channeling through there. Who even knows, you know? But to be honest with our own selves, I think is important, you know? And so, I mean, and there are systems that say, you know, what we do with our thought, even unconsciously, it's like that has a reality. There's something there, you know, and so we can get to you know, the wild Christ, Yeshua, Jesus, whatever kind, the Druid of Galilee, however we want to figure.
Yeah.
You know, that let ye who is free of blemish, you know, cast the first stone, you know, it's like who, you know, who are we to judge anyone, you know? And of course, we need to have discernment, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I don't really consider that factor necessarily. I mean, obviously, if they've done some atrocity, it's like, whoa, okay, that's total contradiction to what the teaching is or something like that. But in some sense, I think these things come through us. You know, a painting comes through someone, music comes through someone and teachings are not the teacher, you know? Everyone
Yes.
has their complexity, but in um, this phrase or that phrase or something, that person's not really in there. You know, you can imagine 100 other people had that idea before and just didn't get published. Or, you know, it's like in some sense, I think we are just kind of little fractals. We are just kind of little electrons. And this whole idea of like, this is my vision and this is my brilliant idea. It's like, no, if we had that process of science, it wouldn't have been Einstein, but someone else's human mind would have got all the learnings they needed to have that insight. I do believe that, you know, I don't think we're all like irreplaceable. You know, if someone had killed Einstein, we never would have figured out E equals MC squared. You know, I don't believe that. Someone I think would have, it would have come to a
Yeah.
critical mass and the human mind would have connected the dots. I may be
Mhm.
wrong. I'm totally open to that, but I think we think we're more special than we actually may be, and that we're just kind of little, little electrons, beep, boop, beep, boop, boop. Oh, I saw the frequency of that one, like, oh, and now I'm learning about my little frequency, and like, but I could have learned it from someone else also, you know? It's not like it was just that one person that is the only thing that could have set that spark off for me, and like, no, it could have been a lot of different things, you know? Yeah.
I love that. I think that it comes back to this understanding of well, why do I respect that person and not respect that person? Or like, why are the men that you respect different from the men that I respect? And I really do think it's because you're not really in a way, you're not really respecting that human. You're respecting the archetype that is noticing the archetype inside yourself. And so it's like these two archetypes are like looking at each other and they're just kind of like tipping your hat. And I think that, that's why some of the men that I wrote down from my list are like fictional characters, is because that fictional character is written to have a specific archetype to carry its momentum as the development of the character. And as I'm reading it, that archetype is looking at that archetypal seed inside my soul and being like, "Hey," and it's going like, "Whoa, you're over there?" And it's like, "Yeah, man, like I'm right here." And then it kind of like, comes out as like you read that page and you go, wow, I really respect Aragorn. That guy is a hell of a guy, you know? And it's just like you're just noticing archetypes and you're just looking at a mirror. I find that really cool. And I always found that really interesting because, you know, nothing's original, right? It's all just like coming from absolute consciousness and it's just being recycled over and over and over again like just like this conversation like thousands and times more it's just going to play out because for this specific moment our bodies have tuned to just capture this frequency and it's just kind of like coming out just through the kind of the elegance of our tongues right now.
Mm. Yeah. Do you want to, on that note, just kind of like hit up, reference some of the people on your list and just like a little bit about them and and I'll do the same and we'll just kind of dance out with some of that stuff. And I'm wondering
Absolutely.
too, just on a side note, no, no, let's keep going with it.
So one question that I wanted to just throw out there is the what is demanded of both the person respecting and the person being respected. That was just something that kept coming to me that I wrote down. It's just a fun question to kind of have as like a trailing thought as we're kind of talking about this. The first person I wrote down was Martin Shaw, who is a mythologist, a storyteller, a brilliant poet, and similar to your relationship with Campbell, Martin exemplifies that for myself. Um, he just re he reminded me to to pure to look at the world through myth, to be a part of it, to be an example of living myth. And that was huge. And I think that it continues to always be huge because, during times where I'm like horribly depressed or during times where I'm greatly excited or whatever, if you kind of flip that through a mythological lens, you become a part of the story and you become an active participant in the story rather than someone who is like, being victimized by the gods and tormented, but rather you are You are the fairy tale that the Fae folk are telling each other around the campfire, right? And you are the interesting story that, that they're excited about. So it's like, oh man, Cody, his alternator just blew in his car again. He's look at him, he's really upset, and they're all going, oh man, that's so juicy, and it brings a whole different perspective to life. And it was a blessing to be reminded that of again. So Martin Shaw certainly was one of the top folks from myself. Robert Bly, and you can attest to this, just a man to um, shamelessly approach poetry and trauma, in a gruff kind of, he's like a bear to me. He's like a wild kind of gruff bear. And I remember, someone was talking to him about like, oh yeah, well, I had a horrible father and this happened. And he just was like, so what? It just pierced through all the bullshit and it was like, so what? You had a bad dad. All right. Like, what are you going to do about it? And the way he weaves that ideology with this kind of silver tongue was fascinating to me because it was a side of masculinity that you're not really given lessons about that as a young boy, I think. As a young boy, you're like, this is what masculinity is, and you have to act a certain way. And for me, when I read Bly, I was like, oh, this is a different approach to masculinity. In some ways, it feels more stable and more strong and more real rather than this kind of Marlboro man mechanic kind of guy, Not to say that those don't have its uses, but Robert Bly definitely felt really good. Um, James Hillman, which again, I'm just naming off all like these guys are just like the rat pack of of like men's group, but I love James Hillman because he's a psychologist that seems like he really hates psychology and therapy, and that's really fascinating to explore this concept of like psychology has its place, but it certainly needs to be reevaluated because it seems to do more harm than good in most cases. And that is fascinating to me, and inspiring because, I think a lot of self-help methods don't necessarily work. And as a person that does struggle through depression and anxiety and stuff, I think the contemporary lessons that are available seem to be less of a tool and more of a burden in some cases. And James Hillman kind of, uh, I don't know, just allowed me to look at that through another lens. I'll do one more and then we can jump to you because I just got a bunch. Um, Malidoma Somé was incredible when I read him. His book of Spirit and Water. I think that his ability to kind of straddle two worlds um, was fascinating to me. I mean, he was his story is incredible. Literally taken from his home to be raised in like this Western paradigm and his kind of schism between identity and then reevaluating that on his own terms is inspiring because it kind of teaches you that sometimes we are forced to create our own uh you know rites of passages for ourselves. If they're not given to us, then we need to kind of find a way to do it for ourselves, whether that's through the help of like external factors in our world. But yeah, I really like that because I think here in the West we don't have rites of passages. And so, but we do have trauma, right? You're not going to escape that. And so to be able to kind of you know, dress your trauma up in a way that is a rites of passage is was is helpful, I think, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just touch on those themes too. I'll share three people. I could go on forever. As I was making lists, there were
Amen.
lists on lists and lists. I was just like, there are so many men that I just so deeply admire. But kind of touching on those themes of like we need initiation, we need ritual space, and most of us don't necessarily have the context or necessarily the wherewithal of figuring out how to do that, how to engage other men, even broaching these topics, or finding those outlets. And so, some people that I really admire, kind of took the creative path and went through music, through writing, etc. So from music, John Darnielle from the Mountain Goats is like my all-time favorite lyricist, someone who every one of his songs is such a well-crafted story of very rarely is it self-referential, actual biological stories, but they are, emotions and situations that have come up for him that he is exploring and playing around with through a whole host of characters. Sometimes his songs, have, you know, five different characters, people, albums that are just on two people and all the other tangential people that weave in and out. Arcs of 30 years. Is a song Jenny from like 30 years ago and a whole album about this character who's been in like songs, every 10 years or something. There'll be another one about her, and now there's a whole album about her, and just really getting fascinated by what we can do with characters. And as someone, as a creative writer and someone, I have, kind of 10 characters that I've created over the last like 3 or 4 years, in any kind of emotional situation, anything that's coming up that I cannot um, give the stage that I would like. I can't emphasize how important or impactful this is without drawing in elements of myth, without drawing on elements that in creative writing you can just set the stage, this person's just rising up from the swamp, and like, oh, what's happening here, It's instead of just like, well, it's me in my room and I feel like this, like, okay, when we open the mythological landscape, we can really give voice to something that needs its own language, and it's not the language of every day. And so John Darnielle is a perfect example of someone. All the songs are about a struggle. It's not I love you, you love me. Oh, now you don't love me. Now I'm upset, repeat endlessly, we're kind of trapped in this like civilization of just recycle concepts, and he's someone who's really taken on the mythological landscape and used it to great effect to really add a certain pathos to all these characters. And it kind of like those characters I created, interestingly, I hadn't thought about it to this moment. They're all people that I respect. My driving focus was like, I don't write about people that I don't admire. I don't write about people, and it doesn't mean they're all just shiny and bright. You see their darkness, you see their struggle, but the core of them has something that's light and bright. I don't ever have people abusing each other. I don't ever give any energy to what I feel is reprehensible. And another man that I greatly admire, his work, I don't really know about him. We can name names and someone can say, oh, that person you didn't know, like even 2 seconds ago, they did this. All right, the work is the work, And so Philip K. Dick is someone that so much of sci-fi nowadays is making more and more films on his stuff. But there are books that, as far as I know of, at this moment, they haven't been made into anything else. One of them is Wallace. Wallace is part of a trilogy, but that first book is on someone who um, I mean the whole narrative is not that important. But on the first like 3 pages, he's like, "This character is me. This is Philip K. Dick talking. I'm writing this to get well needed um, grounding and another perspective on myself. I feel like I'm going crazy. This is my way of handling that. And so the power of the written word to give us." um a, a a portal into another dimension when we're sitting with whatever it is we're sitting with and we're stuck and we're not getting anywhere. And maybe a lot of people do not have anyone in their life that they can really talk about the deepest stories that need to be received, and it's not worth the risk of sharing it if it can't be received. So you just have to sit with it if there's no one in your life that can hear your stories. And that's a big piece of what real loneliness is, not having people in your life who can hear your stories, the deep things that have to come out somehow. And so he writes in this book a few lines that have just stuck with me forever, you know. He's like the main character finds finally this kind of a doctor figure, who is just a positive force that just wants what's good for him. And the character reflects, I've long known that each of us have a phrase that if you say that phrase to us, you will destroy us. I'm like, that's an interesting thought. A few words to say like this big, like hovering over us is this thing, our deepest pain, right? If you can see it and articulate it, boom, you'll kill us, you'll destroy us with those words. And he's like, but now,
Yep.
having met this doctor, I now realize there is another phrase equally powerful that if you were to say it to us, it would heal everything that is wrong with us.
Mm.
Now, maybe this is grandiloquent and maybe not, but there's something to it, something to his writing that can be very simple and very clear and say something that's very deep and very vulnerable. And at the very same time, very uplifting. So it's like he's giving these gems. So you can't really, in normal conversation, slip that in. Hey, how was work? Hey, did you know we each have a phrase that, like, where do you put that stuff, right? It's art that kind of takes all that kind of stuff in.